webinar for this month, Leadership Resilience in Times of Crises. And I am Dr. Loy Parks. I am the Leadership Development and Institutional Strengthening Specialist with the Caribbean Center for Development Administration. I really want to thank you all for registering. And this webinar, I think, has made a record in terms of the number of registrations. And we also want to welcome those who I know they're not able to join us right now, but they have registered and they will be listening in to this webinar when they get the recording later in the week. So I just want to give you a few tips on how to ensure that you have the best possible virtual learning experience in this webinar. So I want to encourage you to close all software applications except for WebEx, of course. That would kick you out of the webinar. Use your phones, your cell phones, your office phones. This is part of our strategy for helping our stakeholders, our leaders around our Caribbean region and beyond to continue to learn and develop through these webinars. So this is a learning experience, and we want you to be able to focus as much as possible. If you have an internet cable, it's best to plug that in. And if you have a good working headset and microphone, also to plug that in. And so we have a couple of feedback tools within the WebEx platform that we want you to be aware of if you're not yet aware. So if you look to the right of your screen, you will see a toolbar below the list of names. As you start at the far left, you will see the raise hand feature. That's that hand that is up. And so when the time is appropriate, we will invite you to ask your questions, and so we will invite you to raise your hand. Right beside the raise hand feature is the green check mark. And so if we want to get a response, say yes or no, we use the green check mark, and beside it, the X, the red X, which stands for no. So, very simple and basic question. So somebody is unmuted. Let me see who might that be. Okay, great. So if you find the green check mark, I'm going to ask you just to click on it for me. So say you're responding to the question, are you here in this webinar? Yes, Tracy, I see your green check mark. Shule or Shule. I'm sure you pronounce it. Renata, yes, I see it. Nicole. Quite a few green check marks. Fantastic. And I really want to say a wonderful welcome to many persons who are, just your names you seem to, maybe it's your first time with a webinar here with us. I see also a lot of persons who, they're always with us, always part of this virtual community. Right? Fantastic. Now, Stephanie, I see you have found the raise hand feature. Let me just unmute you. Hi, Stephanie. I was wondering if you're asking a question, or I'm going to mute you back. Okay, and so to get rid of the green check mark, all you have to do is to click on the green check mark again, and you will get rid of it. Great. The other thing I want you to be aware of is the chat feature. So further down, you will see the chat feature, and it will say send it to, and I want you to choose all participants. A common way that we invite you to participate is to put your comments or your questions in the chat. So I want to ask you, if you have found the chat feature, just type in good morning, and so that we know that you found the chat feature and that you know how to use it. So send to all participants. So Diane, you sent to panelists, not all participants. Michael, what you sent to me privately, but not to everybody. So I want you to send to all participants. If you're having a challenge with that, just let me know. Because I'm wondering if we have, okay, so I'm going to ask our virtual producer. Let me see if perhaps I can do that. I am so sorry. It's quite good to find out these things. All right, I find you all the privileges. So let's see if you can do that again. Send to all participants. Let me see if you can. Are you seeing it now? Ah, yes, I see many people doing that. Ah, thank you very much. Great. And so one other feature I want to bring your attention to is our pointer tool. So there's another toolbar to the top of your screen. And to the far left, you'll see a right-facing arrow. That's your pointer tool. So if you click on that, and then you drag, your cursor becomes a pointer tool, a right-facing arrow. And then you can click. You notice you see my pointer tool, and I'm dragging it all over. There, Francia, Joyanne, I'm seeing your pointer tool. Great. Many people have found it. So, using your pointer tool, I'm going to ask you to point on the flag from where you're joining. And if you don't see your flag, or for some reason you're having a challenge with your pointer tool, you can just type in the chat, which country are you joining from today? So although I work with CARICAD, which is based in Barbados, I work remotely from Jamaica. That's where I'm from. So I see lots of people joining from Trinidad, from Belize, all right, from Guyana, oh, all over, St. Lucia, you name it. Ah, I love it, from Suriname. Thank you all so much from BVI. Yes, a lot of the BVI crew is here. Fantastic. All righty. So, like I said, this webinar, we have had a bumper crop, as it were, of participant registration. And so, we figure that people are definitely interested. Hi, Simone from Montserrat. Nice to have you here. So, we wanted to also use this chat feature. And Georgiana, we're going to ask you, we don't want to use our videos today because it tends to use a lot of bandwidth. But we are going to ask you to place in the chat, what are some of the leadership challenges you are now facing during this COVID-19 crisis? Now, you can also raise your hand if you wish to just state it quickly, but you can also use it in the chat because we want to see those questions, and our guest facilitator today, we will, come back to them. So, Nicola, thank you. You're first out of the block, and you're saying, challenge you're having, getting employees to understand that it's not business as usual, and that we all need to not just be present, but be present at work. Yeah. Gail. Hi, Gail. Gail is one of our esteemed LDP, Leadership Development Program alumni, managing remotely. Ah, yes. No, this webinar is really about how do we become more resilient as leaders in all of this. But all of these things are challenging our resilience, eh? Remote work, oh yes. And one of the things we're hoping to do is that in the future we'll do a webinar very specific to how do we manage remote teams. Jacqueline says communication. Yes, indeed. Indeed, communication is an ongoing challenge we have as leaders, but certainly it's exacerbated during these times. And Mary says, working at home content not resonating with leaders. Yes, but that's such a change. We're used to managing by seeing. You to see the people. So Audrey, another of our alumni, says, using different platforms to teach. Oh, yes. But thankfully, I think we got a little more used to that in the CARICAD Leadership Development Program. But yes, indeed, we find ourselves using not just one platform, but many platforms for many different things as we work. Yeah. I actually heard a new quote-unquote verb. People are zoomed out. Another known, we become zombies. Oh, yes. So there are other challenges with employee productivity, dealing with people who are abusing the situation and not coming to work when it's their turn to be on rotation. Availability of information that you need to work from home. Coping strategies. How do you balance private and work imperatives? That's a very good one, Daphne. And that is something that a lot of people are coping with. particularly as you work from home, and many persons are not only dealing with working from home, but homeschooling, elder care, all of these things happening in the one home space. Assessing performance remotely. That's a very good one. That's a very good one, Mary. Thank you for that. You can keep the questions coming, keep the issues coming. Managing productivity with empathy. Yes. We love to talk about managing polarities, How do we manage, people dealing with the stress of the COVID-19 and the need to continue productivity? Indeed. So I'm going to ask, so Stephanie, you have your hand up. You had it up from before. And so just going to ask you, Stephanie, if you're hearing me, just to take your hand down. I don't think it's a question that you had. Thank you so much. Let's hear it. Any other challenges? I'm just going to post in the chat instructions to connect audio. Some persons may need it. So Jennifer says, realities of working remotely and helping persons to cope. Exactly. So as leaders, you have to cope yourself. And you also have the responsibility of helping your team to also cope. How do you do that? Nicola, oh, that's a big one, Nicola. Nicola types, you need to help staff deal with reduced salaries, right? So many of our countries are now grappling, well, all of the countries are grappling with the economic fallout. But there is the issue of how do we close these gaps in our budgets. And one of the ways that many governments are exploring is to renegotiate salaries and compensation packages, whether it's to reduce, cut salaries, forego salary increments, different ways and means. It's not an easy business at all. Sandra says, embracing the various online platforms for trading opportunities. Yeah. Carla, managing fears. Oh, that's a good one. And a big one. There's so many fears. There's so many fears that have crept up in this time. When will this end? Will it end in the near future? How can I continue to cope with this loss indefinitely? Will I lose my job as the financial fallout from this continues to grow? Will my children fall behind in their education? And there's so many challenges, so many things. Indeed. So Deidre, how to stay motivated? Yeah. Because, especially for many of us are working at home, you see, our brains are hardwired to commute to work for the most part. So we have to rewire your brain to be productive in your home space. Vicky says, managing accountability. Oh, yes. So there are many challenges. Stacey, how to help staff deal with pressing uncertainty and to make sense of the crisis? Oh, indeed, Tracy. As leaders, one of the key roles we have to play now is sense making. And we have to do this in the context of having very imperfect information, having sometimes no information. For instance, we don't know when it's going to end. Monica, information overload. Yes, receiving too much information on COVID. Yes, and that also has an impact on our ability to be resilient in this time. Yeah, information overload can impact our psyche, indeed. Fantastic. So, I thank you all for sharing. There's some more things coming. Francis says, maintaining regional priorities and regional projects that has both regional and national components. Indeed, we had all these wonderful plans at the regional level about the things that we're doing. Things like rolling out, results-based management systems. And now, things have thrown us off our targets. Tashion, motivating helping staff to maintain their relevance in a time when jobs are being cut. Indeed. you know, COVID has caused us to really think about which jobs are adding value, you know, which jobs are necessary. Now we have different categories of what's essential and what's not. And it does lead to the question of which jobs do we actually need? Do jobs need to be redefined to remain relevant? And that too calls for resilience. How do I learn new techniques, learn to work from home, new responsibilities, learn new skills? Indeed. The boundaries, Monica talked about the boundaries between work and home life. Ah, yes. Those boundaries have been blurred indeed. Thank you all so much for sharing. So we're at the top of the hour. And again, for those who, so Edward is asking me to mute. Okay, Edward, I do believe your mic should be muted already. It is muted already. So we are not hearing your background noise. Great. So welcome officially to this webinar. The topic today is leadership resilience in times of crises. And this is one of the services that CARICAD provides to our stakeholders, our clients, and that is to support ongoing leadership development through ongoing learning and networking opportunities. And so we are so happy in this, our 40th year of our existence, to be able to be reaching you in various ways through our various services, all based and grounded in our Caribbean Public Service Charter. All of the work that we do is grounded in our Public Service Charter, which has been endorsed by the Ministers of Public Services across our 17 member states. And our charter really, it's about having a harmonized approach to public sector transformation as we gear transformation towards creating sustainable development for the region. And it is grounded on 6 pillars: capacity, standards, governance, accountability, openness, and legislation. And our webinar today really falls in the area of capacity. And leadership is a capacity that, let me tell you something, this COVID-19 has certainly brought that to the fore. And where leaders are leading effectively before, you see that cream rise to the top. And of course, COVID-19 also points to certain gaps that we see that already existed, but it kind of, the COVID-19 might show it up a little bit more. And so we know that for us to have public sector transformation, it has to be led and be led effectively. If you want to find out a little bit more about how these pillars are broken down, this slide shows that. But you can find out more about this on our website if you go to www.caricad.net to learn more about our public service charter. And so today it is my privilege to welcome our guest presenter, Mrs. Denise Dumas-Koylass. So Denise is eminently qualified as a clinical psychologist, but her other areas of expertise relate to human resource management and project management. She is a certified action learning coach with the World Institute for Action Learning, and she is one of our alumni. She was a member of Cohort 4, Positively Explosive C4, and she is the Secretary-Treasurer for the Trinidad and Tobago chapter of our Continuous Learning and Development Network. And she has over 27 years of experience working in various capacities in the public service in Trinidad. And certainly as a clinical psychologist, as a leader of a lot of experience in the public service, she is eminently qualified to speak to us today on this topic of leadership resilience. And so without further ado, I hand over to her. She will be presenting for around 30 minutes, and so we ask you to hold your questions and comments until the end. So Denise, you can go ahead and unmute your mic, and I'll pass the ball to you.
Hey, thank you, Loy, and good morning to all of you. It is good to be here to discuss with you the important issue of building resilience in times of crises. The aim of this session is to discuss the strategies and techniques that we can use to build our resilience, as well as to empower others to survive and thrive in times of crises. The focus of the session will be on, firstly, identifying strategies to build our own resilience. Secondly, on discussing our role as leaders in times of crises. And thirdly, on outlining the support systems that organizations can use to build capacity for resilience. But before we proceed to discuss how to build resilience, I would like us to discuss what is meant by that term. And so I invite you now to share in the chat your perspective on what is meant by the term resilience.
So you can either just raise your hand or you can type in the chat. What do you think resilience means? So there are lots of, so Jackie's friends being able to withstand adversity. Claudia says, never giving up. Trudy, the ability to bounce back from challenges. Esther says, surviving in spite of. Debbie, it's the capacity to withstand challenges, being able to withstand in spite of challenges, being able to bounce back, standing strong, Aretha says. Francis, I like this one, thriving under drought. Ah! Oh, yes. Daphne, ability to adapt successfully in challenging situations. Of course, correct. Being able to withstand challenges and rebound stronger, the ability to rebound and even thrive no matter the circumstances. Ability to recover quickly from challenges, ability to survive and standing focused. Resilience is about persisting through difficulties, strength during challenging times. Denise, there are plenty. You got some bright people in this session today.
Definitely, definitely. So thank you for sharing your perspectives on what is meant by the term resilience, and you are all quite right. Okay? Resilience refers to our capacity to bounce back in the face of a crisis and to adapt to new circumstances and the new normal. And I need to emphasize that the capacity for resilience is a response that we can all learn. It is not an innate trait that some are born with. Furthermore, experiencing a crisis can make us question many things that we took for granted. And as a result of the questioning and reflecting process, experiencing a crisis can actually lead to the development of profound personal growth. So we've been referring to this term crisis, and essentially a crisis may be defined as an emotionally significant event, such as the sudden death of a loved one, or an unstable time with potentially negative outcomes, such as the current COVID-19 global pandemic. It is the potentially negative outcomes of a crisis that create the major concern. And when we think about COVID-19, we are all, of course, very much concerned about the risk of infection and all the undesirable outcomes associated with that risk. The question is, how do we respond? And the research indicates that there are 6 possible stages in our response to a crisis. There is denial, which is essentially shock and disbelief. And so we may tell ourselves initially that this is not happening, and we may try to ignore all the signs. There's a possibility of anger when we realize that it is in fact happening. And we may try to play the blame game and point fingers at others for the situation that we are now facing. There's a possibility of bargaining, where we may express regret about decisions made, or we may try to regain some sense of control by attempting to bargain with those in authority. There's a risk of depression as a result of any losses we may be experiencing, such as reduced income, lack of physical contact with loved ones, and the loss of personal freedom. Eventually, we may reach a stage of acceptance where we can deal with the reality of the situation and take appropriate action to move forward to more positive outcomes. And finally, as a result of questioning, reflecting, and making informed decisions, we can claim the power to find meaning and to experience profound personal growth. So at this point, I invite you to share in the chat where you are right now in your response to COVID-19. Is it denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, or meaning?
You just type in the chat which one. Great. I see Francia using our pointer tool. So Francia, sure. Are you acceptance or maybe it's acceptance? So quite a few people are at the stage of acceptance. Some are at the meaning stage. Some are just exhausted. Some are in between acceptance and meaning. Some people are at the depression phase. And it's interesting that more than one person talked about, bouncing in between. And indeed, a lot of times you go in between phases.
Exactly.
And Gail is like, can you jump from denial to acceptance?
Definitely. You don't have to go through, it's not this kind of rigid path. So yes, you can definitely bounce between stages.
Fantastic. Thank you all for your responses.
Thank you. And this is why it's important for us to build our capacity for resilience. We cannot afford to get stuck in any one stage, whether it be denial or anger or depression. We need to build our strengths in certain key areas and to draw on these strengths to keep moving forward through the crisis to more positive outcomes. Research indicates that the 4 key areas for building our capacity for resilience are our spiritual strength, our mental strength, our social strength, and our physical strength. And our spiritual strength really functions as our rock foundation. As the great teacher taught, if we picture our life as a house, then that house can only stand against the storms and floods if it is built on a solid rock foundation. We therefore need to dig deep and develop a strong sense of who we are, our beliefs, our values, and our sense of connectedness to a higher power or higher purpose. Essentially, we need to take the time to be clear on our purpose and to be committed to accomplishing our higher level goals if we are to overcome any crisis. This commitment to our higher level purpose requires us to be motivated to persevere despite the challenges that may come our way. So research indicates that our spiritual strengths, our beliefs, values, and higher level goals are the rock foundation for building our capacity to overcome crises. And I invite you now to share in the chat the strategies that you believe we can use to build and recharge our spiritual strength.
Claudia says prayers. Samoy says prayers, meditation, staying connected with family, Vicky says. Some people use, Bible apps, motivational apps, daily communication, daily devotions, messages of hope and inspiration, trusting God. Hester says making sure she has me time, engaging in deep introspection, listening to motivational music. Indeed. What it says, reflection. Sandra, I like that one. Staying away from negative media. Prayer, reflection, praise and worship songs. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, because I believe that we could all benefit from the ideas shared here. And it's clear that we need to develop a clear sense of identity. Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Carl Sandburg wrote that it is necessary now and then to take some time to ask ourselves three essential questions. Who am I? Where have I been? And where am I going? Otherwise, if we're not careful, we will allow temporary setbacks to take up our time and divert us. We therefore need to practice living a life of meaning and connectedness. Living a meaningful life is a rich source of strength for building our resilience. We will now examine another building block of resilience, which is our mental strength. And during a crisis, our rational brain, which makes logical decisions, may be overwhelmed by our emotional brain, which processes our feelings and fears. And if we're not careful, the frequency or intensity of the stressors that can occur during a crisis can stimulate our brain to become and remain increasingly hypervigilant for threats, even though it's threats that do not exist. As a result, if we don't learn to manage our emotional responses to triggers, we can essentially de-skill our rational brain and permit emotions to take control. This is why we need to become more aware of our thoughts and emotions and build our capacity for self-control. Developing our emotional intelligence is therefore a key factor in building our mental strength. We also have to motivate ourselves to keep moving forward through a crisis, to adapt to the changes required, and to maintain a positive, future-focused outlook. We cannot afford to get stuck in a negative stage or frame of mind. So, how do we become and remain mentally strong in the midst of a crisis? How do we deal with our thoughts and emotions and avoid becoming overwhelmed by the situation that we may be facing? At this point, I invite you once again to share in the chat the strategies that you believe we can use to remain calm and positive in the midst of a crisis.
Hello, Denise. Your volume is going in and out.
Okay. Let me just check the system. You hearing me? Okay, I see some very good ideas coming up in the chat. Bring your strengths, hobbies, talking to friends and family, eating well, switching off from negative news, early morning walks and clutter, positive affirmations. Yes, definitely. So I hope that you all are hearing me. I will try to speak a little louder. Getting a routine. Yes, that is very helpful because we respond well to predictability. And so trying to really structure our day really does help to bring some sense of normalcy to us. Okay, thank you. So we're going to continue looking at strategies. Another strategy that we can use is calming our brain, which we can do through techniques such as slow, deep breathing, especially when we exhale longer than we inhale. And that's an important technique involved in stimulating what is referred to as our vagus nerve. So, for example, you can slowly and deeply breathe in through your nostrils for a count of 5. Hold your breath for a count of 2. And exhale slowly through your mouth for a count of 7. And you can repeat this for a few minutes until you begin to feel calm. And there are other techniques like progressive muscle relaxation that you can learn by watching videos on YouTube. Another important strategy for building our mental strength is to challenge any automatic negative thoughts that we may have. And this is very important. So, for example, when you find yourself experiencing a strong negative emotion, such as fear, take a pause. Pause and examine the thoughts that you are having, and then operate like both a defense attorney and a prosecutor, and look for the evidence supporting or not supporting that thought. Afterwards, function like your own jury and decide whether the initial negative thought was accurate or whether there is, in fact, a more balanced and realistic way to think about the situation. We call this in psychology cognitive restructuring, and some laypersons may refer to it as renewing your mind. I've shared with you in this slide a worked example of a thought-challenging record that one of my clients gave me permission to share. And you can always examine it in more detail after the session when you receive the recording. It's also important for us to shift our mindset. And some of you referred to that when you spoke about cultivating an attitude of gratitude. Some spoke about daily affirmations. So Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, he's a renowned UK doctor and author. He agrees with you all. He recommends cultivating an attitude of gratitude. Instead of ruminating over stressful situations, we can replace our automatic negative thoughts with daily reminders of what is good and positive in our life. We need to also identify our strengths and periodically remind ourselves of the challenges that we have already overcome in the past. Dr. Chatterjee also recommends writing down and repeating affirmations. And affirmations are essentially short, powerful, and positive statements of intent. For example, I am an overcomer, or I choose to be joyful. I choose to be hopeful. Repeating these affirmations out loud or in our mind will help in the process of developing a more resilient mindset. So we go on now to look at the third building block of resilience, which is the strength we gain through our connectedness to others. We are social beings, and we benefit greatly from developing and maintaining healthy relationships in our family, in our workplace, and the community. It's important to note that our emotional intelligence is a key element of our social strength. Our capacity to connect to others is directly related to our ability to empathize and respond effectively to the emotions of other people. Social support is another key element of social strength. We need to continually check ourselves to determine if we are coping well, and if not, to have the courage to reach out and ask for help. The help may come in the form of advice from relatives, from friends or colleagues, as well as from professional coaches and counselors. And similarly, we need to assess how well other persons in our areas of influence are coping and to provide support where possible. So, at this time, I invite you to share in the chat the strategies that you believe we can use to build our social strength.
So you can place in the chat, what strategies do you use? What strategies do you know of that we can use to recharge our social strength? And I see a few in the chat there, being part of support groups, networking with your colleagues, being a source of positivity yourself. Look out for others, especially juniors, connecting with friends, sharing with others, buddying up, establish good communication mechanism with your team members. Just checking in with your team members, your colleagues daily and ask how they are doing. Teamwork, be an encourager. Dialogue with college friends as well. Host a game night with the team. Assist the elderly. Checking on team members. Connecting with friends and family. Fantastic. Lots of suggestions here. Interacting with and encouraging others. I really like those ones about, actually giving to others as a part of social connecting and building and recharging our social strength. Avoid generalizing and acknowledge situations on a case-by-case basis. Quick pass by, my friend. Yes, Gregory, I do a lot of social distancing. You just rock up at the gate and say, how do you do? Esther says, be other-minded. Fantastic, Denise.
Yes.
Lots of suggestions here. Thank you all.
Definitely. And someone had mentioned earlier the importance of setting boundaries. And to protect our capacity to remain resilient, we really need to draw clear boundaries. So, for example, if we are working from home, we need to disconnect from the workplace and our manager and colleagues by a certain designated time, which needs to be communicated. Similarly, we need to take periodic breaks from our electronic devices and social media. We also need to learn to relax and invest our time in developing a rich life outside of work. In this regard, we can develop hobbies, join a club, or volunteer with a community group. And as we know, many opportunities exist to help those in need, especially at this time. And finally, to build our capacity for resilience, we need to invest in our physical health. And the three major elements of physical strength are nutrition, exercise, and sleep. And someone had mentioned that earlier about getting adequate sleep. And in recent times, we've developed a key interest in building our immunity system. Now, this is an area where many of us need help. Many of us are struggling with how do we get fit. So I invite you to share in the chat the strategies that you believe we can use to build our physical strength and overcome any barriers we may have to getting fit. Really, some life balance, so developing an exercise routine.
Okay, so lots of suggestions here. Walking. Audrey is a serious exercise buff. Let's say exercise daily. And quite a few suggestions around yoga. YouTube videos. Yes, I am a fan of using YouTube videos as well. Nayoka, I'm also a great fan of gardening, exercise and dieting, eating well. Trying not to snack too much. So to those of us working at home, Deidre, stop eating cheesecake. Oh, and I know of a neighbor who, of course, is at home, and she loves to bake these things and bring them over. So I have a challenge. Using the steps instead of elevators if you're still at work and your building accommodates that. Fantastic. Lots of suggestions around walking. Indeed. Dancing to your favorite music. Indeed. Resist the urge to open the refrigerator every time you pass by it. Yes, Francis. We feel you. When working from home, there's a suggestion here. Walk around the house, walk up and down the stairs, do sit-ups to relax and de-stress. Jennifer, watch a comedy. And Mary says, making nutritious delights from fruits around. Indeed, lots of fruits we have in the Caribbean here. Drink lots of water. Oh yes, it's something that, really be very deliberate about it. Arlene says, try using natural plant products. Okay, so lots of suggestions here, Denise. Thank you all for your suggestions.
Definitely, thank you. And so essentially, of course, it's about developing a plan and a routine that will help us to achieve a balanced diet, regular exercise, and adequate sleep. And in terms of the sleep, we need to really disconnect from our smartphones, from our devices by a certain time because of the impact of the blue light on our brains, okay? Also, some of us have a habit of working on the bed, bringing our laptop and so on, but we need to rewire our brains to know that when we come to lie down on that bed, it is to rest, it is to sleep. So there are different strategies that we can use to really address any issues that we have with regard to our sleeping habits. Okay, so we've been discussing the various stages that people may experience when responding to a crisis, such as, and I'll remind you, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and meaning. And we also have been discussing the major building blocks of resilience, which are spiritual strength, mental strength, social strength, and finally, physical strength. So at this point, I would like us to discuss the strategies that we can use as leaders to help others in our areas of influence to overcome crises and move forward toward more positive outcomes. And so I invite you to share your ideas in the chat. And this is where we've been looking at ourselves before, but now, mindful of all these issues, we want to come up with strategies for helping others as leaders.
Esther said, listen attentively, for real. Indeed, that is one of the key concepts that we teach in our leadership development programs. How do we really listen? Because we love to talk about 110% listening. So without listening, we can't actually show empathy. Right. So Kay says, don't judge, nurture, even with tough love when needed. Vicky says, establish one-on-one with team members. Frank says, focus on the pertinent issue. Create a motivational group chat or hotline. Be an example and be involved in the process. Reach out to those who may not have support or may be lonely. Having conversations about the crisis and listen to others. Listen to the issues that are conveyed. Checking in with your team. Having frank discussions with team members to move all members to the state of acceptance and meaning. Fantastic. Lots of suggestions here. Having conversations about the crisis. To hear things people are not saying but speaking with their bodies. Yes, I like this one. 5-minute motivational morning huddles for those working in the office. And indeed, that could be the same thing. You can also do that remotely too. Affirm their value to the team, Mary said. Lots and lots and lots. Communicating regularly. They'll be calling others and engaging them in meaningful conversation. Even to listen to them describe their days as parents and dealing with homeschooling. Demonstrate positivity at all times. Be honest in our communication, ensuring the team understands the organization's response to the situation. Thank you so much. Now, I might not be able to read them all, but trust me, we are seeing all of these wonderful strategies in the comment section. Thank you so much.
Definitely. And essentially, we can learn so much from observing how regional and international leaders have been handling this global pandemic. It's evident that the more effective leaders have adopted an adaptive leadership style because it enables them to mobilize the people to handle tough situations, and it allows for improvisation, learning, and adapting to new situations as we learn more about the issues that we are facing. As citizens, we respond better when our leaders show empathy, as we feel valued, respected, and supported. We also respond positively to open communication lines. We want to be kept informed, but as some of you mentioned, we also want the opportunity to be able to provide feedback and to offer suggestions. Effective leaders also provide support. People need to know that support services are available. And depending on the nature of the crisis, this could range from the organization of individual counseling and crisis management group sessions to the provision of food hampers and shelter. In terms of policies and procedures, effective leaders pay attention to issues related to the effective management of human resources, as well as the health and safety concerns. And that is why many persons are looking at, well, okay, what are the guidelines for pandemic leave? What is the framework for working from home? We need to be very clear on what our policies and procedures are as we move forward. And yes, we are learning as we go along, but we need to be clear. We need to keep persons informed. So essentially, those of us in leadership positions need to create a positive culture in which persons feel reassured that they have the capacity and the support required to keep moving forward to a better future. So at this time, I hope that you found the presentation to be useful, and I invite you to pose any questions or comments that you may have in the chat.
Thank you so much, Denise. I'm going to just invite you to just pass the ball to me by clicking on my name and right-clicking to change my role to presenter. So you can, in the meantime, raise your hands, type your comments in the chat. We are open now for questions that you may have. I see a lot of lovely comments. I say, excellent presentation, lots of excellent presentation. Joy said, this is a time to show empathy and help each other to rebuild. So do you have any specific questions around this? Now, I remember earlier, Denise, people were talking about how do we, help our team members to remain productive, supporting them to be productive while they're working at home. I don't know if you've had any thoughts or anything coming up in your practice around that.
Well, the thing is, communication is so important. So, for example, I have a client with senior manager of a particular division, and they have a number of deliverables. So, but of course, they have to be mindful of the fact that at this time, no more than 5 persons should be in the unit at any one time. So they look at, how do they manage their schedule, how, they have specific goals and objectives, and if they need to kind of be more flexible on whether those goals can be achieved at this time, they look at that. So they're reviewing the goals, but they also look at, okay, how best can we work together and mindful of all these lockdown issues that we have to deal with. So I know definitely they are having meetings every day remotely at a certain time, and they also agree on, well, who will be in the office at any one time to ensure that they remain mindful of the guidelines issued by the government.
Fantastic. Raphael, our virtual producer, I'm going to ask you just to pass, to take the ball and just to pass it to me in the meantime. Thank you for that, Denise. Now, let me see if there are any other questions in the chat. Yes, there are. So, here are some questions. Oh, there are many. Let me make sure I'm starting from the top here. So, there is a question here from Gregory. She has a question around the spiritual area. Any suggestions to treat with persons who are not religious? And so, there are people who, they say, oh, they don't believe in a higher power and so on, but they also need help. You can't speak to them of building their spiritual strength because they don't necessarily believe they have that side. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, so, the whole issue is the importance of meaning. Okay, so we may not believe in perhaps a higher power, but I think we all can be motivated by connecting to a higher purpose. And therefore, even if it means reminding persons once again of the vision and the mission of the organization, why we're working, why are we here? What is our role in serving the community? So even that can help. But I really do believe that it's important for persons, encourage persons to reflect on their ultimate life purpose. People need to be encouraged to do some more reflecting at this time, and because that is a source of great energy when you're going through a crisis.
Thanks, Denise. There is another question here in the chat from Vicky. This crisis is ever changing, so it can affect our response to the crisis. How can that be managed? How do we manage, our resilience when we're dealing with something that is a shifting crisis?
Yes, exactly. And that's why we speak about an adaptive leadership style. When we look at some of our regional leaders, they are letting citizens listen. On the basis of the information we have now, this is our plan of action. However, As we get that data, as we learn about how well we are doing, we may need to adjust our policies, our decisions as we go along. And so it is really about building that flexibility in and reassuring persons that as you get information, whatever information you have, you'll be sharing with them, and together, kind of, moving forward through the crisis. I think the critical thing is not getting stuck, but sharing the information, providing the support, and keeping on moving toward more positive outcomes.
All right, fantastic, thanks. Claudia has a question. How do you assist a team member who is challenged with juggling homeschooling and working from home? So they have their work deadlines to meet. They're working from home, but they're also managing the homeschooling challenges.
Yes, well, in that situation, everyone needs to be flexible, including the manager. And we also have to set boundaries. So, when I speak to my clients who've been struggling with that area, I explain to them, set boundaries for your children as well. Develop a routine. One young lady who works at a bank, she was saying, every time they're hungry, they're calling her, she's in a meeting. And when I heard the ages of the children, I said, provide whatever they need to make a sandwich, to make a little meal, put that in the fridge, and let them know they are free to go and make their sandwich and so on. And that had started to work for her. And when she's in a meeting, she puts up a big sign on the door, do not enter. Wait until, I leave this room before we can deal with issues such as meals or homework or whatever. So I think it's important to have a structure, it's important for flexibility, and it's important to set boundaries for everyone.
Yeah. And if I could add to that, there's also the business of what are those things that people need to deliver that they can work on their own as opposed to things they need to do in conjunction with team members. So let us take this webinar. Clearly, I'm working with my team members in real time, but there might be other tasks that I have to do, which doesn't necessarily require interaction. I do them on my own. And I think we have to be, when we're working from home, to allow them to do those tasks in their own time. Of course, you're going to have a timeline for delivery, but not to insist it must be done necessarily in the 9 to 5 space all the time, just that you meet the necessary targets, deadlines, etc. I think that's important. And another tip, not being a parent myself, but heard from another parent, is that she prepares her children snacks just as if they're going to school. So that's also part of the maintaining that structure and discipline for your children. But great question. Great question. So Frances asked us to show that slide again on social resilience. So let me go back to that slide. Is it this one? Is this the slide, Francia? I'm going to unmute her. Francia, is this the slide you're referring to?
No, I think it's the next one. The one that spoke about, yes.
All right. So Francia has a question. Well, like how your mic is unmuted, just go ahead with your question, Francia.
Well, my question is, how do you encourage staff to do these things? I think there was one about building a social network that might be on the next slide, without being intrusive.
Yeah.
There's the next slide. Yes. This one in particular.
Yeah.
How do you encourage your staff or your colleagues without being intrusive?
Yeah. Denise, what are your thoughts? Thank you for the question, Francia.
And the first step might really be, Francia, sharing this PowerPoint presentation with them and using it as a basis for discussion or any handout that you find dealing with this issue. And, giving everybody an opportunity to read it and then come together to reflect and to share, like a informal group session. So, I mean, I speak about the importance of psychoeducational sessions, but if you don't have an AP provider, then you as leader, you could, facilitate these informal discussions. At the end of the day, of course, everyone has to make their own decisions, but I think it would be very helpful to have discussions on the issue.
Yeah. And I think too, in our teams, sometimes also about you being open as well with your own challenges. And so when you kind of show that, okay, I have difficulties, so then even to ask them, what are your thoughts? Do you have any suggestions to help me out with this situation? Once you develop that culture over time, the trust is developed. But really, it's about trust, eh?
Yeah.
You really can't really speak to people about certain things unless you have a relationship. So sometimes you really have to build that relationship. When that trust is built, then you can ask those kinds of questions. But unless you build the relationship to be one of trust, then it's hard to, then everything else seems like intrusion, as opposed to understanding that actually I care about you. Not just you the worker, but you the person. Great question. Thank you for the response, Denise. Let's see. There's so many questions, and I'm afraid we might not get to all of them, but we are certainly going to try. Aldrian is asking, how do we manage sleep? As it is easier to switch off the devices, yes, but how do we switch off our brains?
Okay, good question. So in terms of that, there are certain habits that we can cultivate. So as I said, by a certain time, you turn off all the devices, you stop checking the emails, you stop looking at TV, and so on. And you start just calming your nervous system down. So as I shared, you can do the deep breathing techniques. You can also do progressive muscle relaxation, which is just tensing and relaxing the various muscles in your body. You can also do visualization. So, for example, when I want to kind of calm myself down, I might think my favorite place in the world is Toko in North Trinidad. And so I see myself by the river just relaxing. And all these are techniques that you can use to just calm your system down. And eventually fall asleep. Of course, some people also, some of my clients say they listen to certain apps or they go on YouTube and they listen to certain, maybe the Psalms or different things just to calm their system down. So there are different techniques that you can use.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. Let's take another question. We're coming down to the end.
And I just noticed a missed call from her and it says she calling back.
Denise, are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you, but I'm also hearing another voice.
Yes, I'm wondering. Not sure who that is. So Tashian has a flip question to Frances' question. How do you assist them, I'm assuming is your team members, when you know that they're having a challenge, but they're not opening it up about it at all? You can see that something's wrong, but they're not saying it.
Well, I mean, as you said, Aloy, it really depends on the relationship that you have with your staff. But I mean, if you just share, you get a quiet time, of course, and a private area, and you just share that I've observed, I've noted these behaviors, so I'm sensing that, you're experiencing some level of anxiety, whatever it is that you're observing, you share with them, and you invite feedback, and well, I mean, that's why I recommend the Employee Assistance Program as well, because there are times where we can just have a discussion as leaders with staff, and we share ideas and so on. And there are times when persons really need professional help. And that is where the AP is so important, because you can refer them to a counselor to get support. So as you said, Loy, it depends on the relationship, and we really need to work in our relationships. Don't wait for a crisis to occur. Really work in our relationships on an ongoing basis, but just provide the opportunity to discuss, but always be beginning with what you observe.
Alrighty, thank you so much. Now, I really see that there are a few other questions in the chat, but our time is running out from us. And so what I'm going to invite you to do is I'm going to post our email address in the chat. And if you want to, some, guidance around certain issues that we weren't able to cover today, that you could send in those questions to us via email. But we're going to just now ask Denise, what if you want to say, a key takeaway that you want us to leave the session with, what would that be? What are your closing thoughts?
Well, I really encourage you to think about what we discussed and to decide to take action. Take action to build your capacity for resilience and to empower others. Sometimes we sit on sessions and we say, well, okay, we learned a lot and so on, but we don't implement what we've learned. And so I really encourage all of you to review the slides when you receive them. Consider some of the pointers that your colleagues have shared and really see, well, okay, these 4 areas, mental, social, physical, and of course spiritual, what can I do to strengthen myself and to build my capacity to be resilient? And of course, at the same time, look at how can I help others in my area of influence, whether it is family members, or persons in the workplace, or persons in the community. How can I help others to overcome this and other crises? And that's where, that's my closing.
Denise, I just want to thank you so much. I'm sure you're seeing in the chat all the wonderful comments. This session has been enlightening, informative, helpful, timely, inspiring. Well done, Denise. Thank you so much for being our presenter here today.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, Loy, and the team at CARICAD for this opportunity to share some key points about building resilience in times of crisis. Thank you.
And of course, if you wish to actually get in touch with Denise directly, because you might want our services or advice from a clinical psychologist perspective, just get in touch with us. I've put in the chat our email address, caricad@caricad.net, and we're happy to connect you. And so we're wrapping up now, and just to share with you that our next webinar will be on June 2, and you can look out for that advertisement. And the topic at that time is going to be scenario planning, a tool for organizational repositioning. We clearly, with this pandemic, we've all had to reposition, not only at the individual level, but at the organizational level. How do we do that? And scenario planning is a tool that can help us with that process. And as I said before, if you have any interest in any of our leadership development programs, any of our technical assistance services, do reach out to us at CARICAD@caricad.net. And so before you go, as usual, we are very keen on hearing from you about how you have found the webinar. We always do our feedback poll. So I'm going to invite you now. The poll will be launched momentarily. You'll see it come up on the right-hand side of the screen. Just take a few minutes just to complete that poll. Let us know how you found the webinar. There's a section for any other topics that you're interested in that you would love us to have our webinar on. Host a webinar on. We're happy to take that feedback as well. So thank you all very much. Fill out the poll, and then once you're done, all you have to do is to log out. And you can do so by going to the top right-hand corner of your screen. You see the X, you click on it, the dialog box will pop up, and asking if you wish to leave the session, and you just click on the relevant box. And of course, as usual, we are going to email you the presentation and a link to the recording as well. Thank you all very much. Do have a great rest of the week. Let's give some minutes here to launch the poll.